Okay, welcome back. This is Liam O'Mara. You're on Office Hours with the Mad Professor, and we're continuing our conversation series where we're chatting with congressional candidates, seeing where they stand on the issues, giving them an opportunity to, say hello and talk about where they, what they want to do for us. Because at the end of the day, Congress works for us, and I think a lot of people in Washington have forgotten that. So today we're speaking with Stephen Houlahan, who is running down in the 48th and mostly in San Diego County, but a little tiny bit of Riverside tacked on there. How's it going, Stephen?
It's going great, Liam. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate being able to reach out to your audience, and I'm looking forward to having a dialogue with you tonight. So this is great.
Thanks much. It's always great to meet new people, see what's going on there. And I followed a lot of races down in that eastern San Diego County for a number of years here, and it's been a tough nut to crack. So I'm always really interested in seeing who's doing it, how they're changing things up, what they're going to try. So I'm really looking forward to getting to know you and seeing where you stand on things. So let's kind of start with that. Seems like a nice, easy place to begin here. Why don't you hit me with your elevator pitch? Who are you and why are you in this race?
Well, I'm Stephen Houlahan. I'm a registered nurse, and I've been a registered nurse for almost 25 years. And so I work for Sharp Healthcare. My background's in critical care, and I have a master's in nursing, and I also have an MBA. So I've been serving on the front lines in the fight against COVID for a number of years now. And I understand the loss. I understand what's really been going on. And it's been brutal, especially to our healthcare practitioners, to the doctors, to the nurses, to the ancillary staff, as well as to all those that have suffered from COVID. I'm a former Santee City Council member down here in California 48. Mm-hmm. I served on the City Council from 2016 through 2020. And in 2019, I was the Vice Mayor of Santee. And I accomplished a great deal as a City Council member, and really was very pleased to have served at that level. Mm-hmm. However, I feel like it's time to really step up, especially up to this congressional level, especially after what happened on January 6th. That basically was a coup attempt, was really an affront upon our democracy, upon our Constitution. And I stand strongly besides our Constitution. I've been an activist for over a decade. I'm the president of a group called Save Mission Trails. Mm-hmm. We formed back in 2012, and there was a power plant that was going to be built at Mission Trails Regional Park, which is about a mile away from my home. And I'm an avid mountain biker, hiker, rock climber, snowboarder, and backpacker. And when I heard about this power plant being built, I thought it was a ludicrous idea. But it turned out that Sempra, SDG&E, and Goldman Sachs were coming to town to profiteer on our park. And so I joined together with the Save Mission Trails team. We founded ourselves as a 501c3, and we were able to build a coalition of Democrats, Republicans, no party preference. And we carried it all the way up to the CPUC, the CEC, and that power plant was stopped. And it was a $500 million boondoggle. And Save Mission Trails, we're still standing, and we're still protecting that park. And it's the largest urban park in our nation. Also, a number of years ago, another really bad idea came. They tried to build a fossil fuel natural gas pipeline down the 15 corridor, which is mostly in the East County through the 48th. Right. And again, it wasn't for our benefit in any way. It was to export fracked natural gas, mm-hmm. and basically transport it through and take it down to Ensenada and ship it out. And we rose up again and we stopped that as well. Another $500 million boondoggle. In all, having stopped $1 million worth of unnecessary fossil fuel infrastructure that would have been passed on to our ratepayers. And in San Diego, we are paying the highest rates in electricity imaginable. And so I'm all about going to things like what's called the community choice aggregation and finding real solutions that really will help us in our pocketbook. I'm a coach. I coach baseball. I love coaching baseball. I have a 12-year-old son. And so I've been coaching for 8 seasons now. And this year we're doing the majors. It's been a great season thus far. We're 2-0. And I'm looking forward to playing 2 games back to back this weekend. I'm also a soccer coach.
Oh,
I've been coaching AYSO soccer for 8 years as well. Again, since my son was 4 years old. So absolutely, I love youth sports.
Yeah.
And you got to get out there and be part of it. It's about reaching out to the children. And then, to kind of wrap up the elevator speech, I'm all about women's rights. It's what's going on in the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade. This is one of the pivotal issues in this district, because whether a woman is a Democrat, a Republican, or no party preference, they should have the right to make their decisions with their bodies. Mm-hmm. And as a registered nurse, I understand that this is a medical procedure, that it must be done in a medical establishment. And I marched with Black Lives Matters multiple times, getting out there, walking and doing the right thing and supporting young people, supporting those that have been disenfranchised, and doing the right thing. So hopefully that's a good little start to get us to get a little icebreaker going. So Liam,
absolutely,
take it away.
Absolutely, you've hit quite a few things that already interest me. From the 6th January and BLM issue to energy, and particularly energy prices, which is a big issue right now. We're all seeing the gasoline prices skyrocketing, and that's hitting a lot of people hard. And we have a lot of people in this area, and I have frequently counted myself among them, who struggle to make the bills as it is. And when you add in, an extra $100, $200, in heating and gasoline and everything else here, it really adds up. So I definitely want to come back to that one there. I liked the initial point, though, about the Constitution when you brought up 6th January, because I think that's a really under-discussed aspect of this, especially since so many of the people who initially would have backed that movement and were major Trump supporters love to talk about how much they love the Constitution and support the Constitution. Yet all throughout his presidency, as with so many of our presidents, there's constant violations of basic due process, basic civil liberties, basic constitutional norms. And you had the greatest threat to our constitutional norms yet. And you're right, I think, to put it in terms of a coup attempt. And I'll say that as somebody who professionally studies fascism and neo-fascism. I study extremist movements all around the world. I started off looking initially at a lot of religious extremist movements, Islamic extremism, Jewish extremism, Christian extremism, and then went from there naturally into a lot of political extremist movements. And that really sucked me into, studying a lot of the right populist and neo-fascist movements. And I think that issues like that really aren't understood well, because so many people want to hold on to the idea that they're constitutional conservatives while they throw the Constitution and its procedures out. And
absolutely. Yeah, you are absolutely correct. And the Constitution is the Constitution of the United States of America is really a fundamental document for the entire world. Mm-hmm. To absolutely aspire to. And so when you look at threats to our Constitution, those are the biggest threats to democracy worldwide, and everyone is watching. And absolutely. You can't be a constitutional conservative and violate the Constitution at the same time. You simply that dichotomy just cannot exist. And so it is absolutely important that we have to preserve our Constitution at all costs. We don't want to be in a situation where the Constitution is ever violated. If it's suspended, this is not what we want. My grandfather served in World War II. He served like Saving Private Ryan style in that very first scene where they're landing on the beaches. Right. He was the guy. He was driving that amphibious assault vehicle, and he never wanted to talk about it. He saw horrible things. He was fighting for democracy. He was fighting for our Constitution. And then after that, he fought in the Korean conflict, and he saw terrible things there. And, he was there when MacArthur landed and he was there as well. And then he served in Vietnam as a riverboat captain. And again, he aspired to be a commander, and he was fighting for our Constitution. And that generation, that greatest generation, when their time came, they fought. They fought. They didn't fight. I bet gas prices went up a lot for them in those days. They didn't even have things. They had to stop using, foil.
Rationing everywhere.
To the war effort. And these are the sorts of things that we take for granted now. If you are in Ukraine right now and bombs are falling upon your home, in comparison to gas prices it's an inconvenience, and it does hit our pocketbook, but there's no comparison. There really is no comparison. So, the greatest generation made huge sacrifices for our Constitution, for our democracy. And I believe that we're going to have to make similar sacrifices as we move forward, because we don't know what's going to happen next. Russia may not stop with Ukraine. And so, we have to be, we need to unite as the United States. We need to unite. In World War II, it wasn't about Republicans, Democrats. It was about Americans. We are Americans. This is us. Fight for the flag, right? Right there.
Right. Yeah.
It's all about the flag. And so we're Americans. We need to start having a dialogue about what we have in common, not what separates us. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I will definitely want to come back to talk about the question of dialogue there, because it's something that I have long seen as a massive, massive pet peeve. And I tell students about this all the time. I'm always telling them, reach out to people who disagree with you. Reach out to your parents, your friends, everyone around you, and have conversations when you disagree, because we do have this tendency to pull into ourselves, to, create our own little bubbles. And those are incredibly toxic. I mean, we want to talk about what helped to make things like 6th January possible. It's that complete separation. We've created completely parallel societies with a different media infrastructure and different core values, and pushed ourselves farther and farther apart. Americans have always disagreed with each other, oftentimes quite radically disagree with each other, and people were still able to come together and talk and engage in common activities, helping each other out, taking care of, the less fortunate, this and that. We've always been able to find some way to rise to different challenges. So, and I think that's an interesting point you're raising too about the greatest generation and their stepping up. Because, while I don't think that we're going to end up in quite as insane a kind of military conflict, there are always massive challenges. And one of the things I think that people have dramatically understated about the climate issue, about the global warming issue. And this is something that, to voters in the Inland Empire as a whole and all the way down into eastern San Diego, you have a lot of people who are still in complete denial about anthropogenic climate change. But as far as I'm concerned, that's fine, because at the end of the day, it does not matter what you believe caused it. If you recognize that it's happening and that there are things we can do to mitigate that, that's all that matters. And that's a basic scientific reality here. We can, rise to the challenge here. The military has been saying for a long, long time that this is the greatest security threat this country faces. People think that the refugee crises that we've had now coming out of wars in Africa and the Middle East have been bad. And for Europe, you think the problems coming out of out of the conflicts in Central America and South America are bad in terms of refugees. If refugees bother you, imagine when huge chunks of West Africa, the Middle East, large parts of even the United States, the Southeast is going to get incredibly hot. We're going to have tons of climate refugees pouring out there. And we have to be prepared for that. This isn't a kind of a chicken little issue. It's just a matter of basic, I was a Boy Scout, be prepared. Things can get bad. We don't know exactly what this is going to look like. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but something is going to happen. We're watching the changes right now. And I think that as Americans, we have a proven track record of being able to work together and to step up and to face these challenges. So anybody who wants to talk about what we can do to be better prepared for things.
You're absolutely right. And that's what I mean about the greatest generation stepped up. Their biggest trial and tribulation was World War II. Mm-hmm. We have a climate crisis that is going to be at that same level. Mm-hmm. That is it's already happening. It's Absolutely. Already happening. It's not something that's in the far future. Back in the 80s, I remember studying climate crisis and pandemics, all the refugee crises that would happen. It is happening now.
Right.
And so whether you think it's just the natural, that the earth is just warming because that was what was meant to happen, or you believe that it was this man-made, either way, it's happening. And we have to get prepared. We can be prepared.
Exactly.
And so it doesn't matter about the cause anymore. What
it doesn't.
And you can't argue the science. Science is science. Everyone doesn't get an opinion when it comes to science.
Right.
In the hospital, we don't say, well, you can get a second opinion from a physician, but if you have cancer, you have cancer. You have to treat the cancer. Mm-hmm. Otherwise you will die.
Right.
And and climate crisis is like a cancer. And the longer we deny that we have this problem, the more it metastasizes. Mm-hmm. And Absolutely. And we have to rise up like the greatest generation did, and we have to start working on it. And there will be things that are inconveniences at this time. They're inconveniences now. Later, it will be death. Mm-hmm. We're going to have heat waves that will, in the South, it's gonna harm people. It's gonna harm people.
It will kill mammal life. Yeah, I mean,
it's gonna kill. Yeah, there's already extinction events happening, mm-hmm. and also on the coastlines, the oceans will rise. So here in San Diego, we're gonna have problems. I mean, we're right on the ocean right here in San Diego. I mean, I'm a little more inland. The 48th is inland, but still, we had the worst fire of its time back in 2003, the Cedar Fire, and now every year the worst fire happens again. The worst fire happens again. And so it's absolutely happening. But let's talk about how do we fix it? How do we fix it? And so I alluded to community choice aggregation, or what's also called community choice energy. This works. When you look at distributive solar, so that I can put a power plant on my house that meets my needs. But of course, what happens is, the big regulators, the CEC, the CPUC, the big three energy suppliers, what they want is you to pay, to access the grid. Well, then what we have to do is move to battery backup. So, and we need to make sure that right now what happens is the profits go to the shareholders in Wall Street. Mm-hmm. But who takes the risk? The risk is on the ratepayers. Mm-hmm. And so if we're taking the risk, then we should get the benefit. And that's what a CCA is. That's what community choice aggregation is about. And so what we could do is we could be putting that money back in to our communities. And so when we want to, say it's the municipal buildings. So for instance, as a city council member, we had in the city of Santee, we had a $500,000 a year electric bill. So with a community choice energy program, we could have put that money back, the profits back into the municipality, mm-hmm. and solarized every building and made every building more energy efficient. And that would make our government more efficient. Mm-hmm. We could have taken all of the city vehicles and bought, every time we upgrade to buy new vehicles, you buy an electric vehicle and you create the ability to charge it. So you knock off that $500,000 fossil fuel bill. Now for our fire department, for our sheriffs, they're not going to go around right now in electric vehicles. Absolutely. There's going to be some, absolutely, you're going to have to use some fossil fuel. But there are solutions. It's just you got to get the right people in government to make the right decisions. And so, there's absolutely solutions to be made. And so we can do it. Think of this. There was a time when everyone used blubber lamps from whales. And then they discovered this magical substance called kerosene. And then everyone went to kerosene. But then what happened is, 100 years later, after we used kerosene, Edison and Tesla, they discovered the magic of electricity. And so we all stopped using kerosene lamps and we used electricity. We made the move. And so now is another one of these paradigm shifts. And I bet the kerosene industry, was like, Rockefeller or who not, they didn't want you to move. They wanted to stay on that. Mm-hmm. But we made the change. We did it. And we can do it again. We could do it again. And so now it's about a green economy. And it brings on more, it's good for business. It's good for business. It creates jobs. And I'm not saying the grid goes away. but the grid's at risk. And so it's aging. It needs to be upgraded. And so the big electric companies, they manage the grid. And so out in the backcountry, put all those power lines underground.
Yes.
So they don't burn down the city.
Yes.
And you don't have to put all the solar power plants out in the desert, because you can put them on my house. I can put one on my house. Everyone puts it on their house. And then, and to tell you the truth, Santee, where my hometown, we have more solar than almost anywhere, because it makes financial sense. And so it's about fiscal conservatism.
Right.
So absolutely.
Right. And it's amazing to see how many people will, again, it's a matter of like the language used. People will call themselves fiscal conservatives and then will continually push the most inefficient possible ways of doing things. Massive subsidies for corporations, things like, coal is disappearing. So why are we trying to defend the coal jobs instead of just retraining people for new industries? Things do change. I thought it was hilarious. You mentioned like kerosene lamps. I've got a handful of them behind me here. My
That's
grandfather
how we used to do it.
Yeah, well, my grandfather, one of my grandfathers was, you mentioned the veterans earlier. One of them was in World War II. The other one was in Korea. The slightly younger one was in the Korean War, but he ended up injuring himself coming back here, working for the post office. And then to find a new career, he started refinishing furniture and opened up an antique store. So I grew up kind of around that. And, a lot of things I've inherited from him. And, I have a lot of friends who, pick on me for even using these things sometimes, but they're nice to have when the power goes out. And then, boom, I can immediately light the place back up. But,
right.
No one wants them all the time because, not only do they pollute, but they stink, they create extra heat. There's smoke from them. There's all kinds of problems. Who would go back to this and candles in place of electricity now? But we really are. We're at the cusp of a major transformation here. And America used to pride itself on being innovators. And we forget just how many of the things that make our lives the way they are now started with significant investment because of a need, right? Look at, everyone has a phone they're carrying around, or we're on computers right now, right? Those microprocessors came out of Defense Department and NASA needs.
That's right.
They put that investment there because they had a need to do something. And because they did that, they released that to the rest of us, and tons of industries sprang out of that, which means it was a massive, massive boom to the economy. People wonder, well, you look back at the numbers, why were we growing so much faster in the 50s and 60s? Well, we were investing back then. And, private sector and public sector investment have been falling steadily in tons of areas as we've shifted, around. We've become far less innovative, which bothers me. The United States still leads the world in like Nobel laureates, but a huge number of them are from, foreign universities. They're people coming from overseas, that they put the work in there and then they came to do their work here. And so we're not cranking out that kind of innovation on our own. We're kind of like leeching from the rest of the world. And that's just I don't want to see my country reduced to that. Science is how we became great in the first place. And I love you mentioned, we're not supposed to there's always dialogue and debate within the scientific community, but I like turning this around to my conservative friends. Ben Shapiro's great, cute little tagline, facts don't care about your feelings.
Exactly.
That's science. It is what it is. If it's reproducible and testable, then that's the world in which we live. And if you don't like it, you're just kind of like shoving your fingers in your ears. It's kind of like applying leeches instead of going to an RN.
Absolutely. And then sometimes, like even leeches has come back. So, for some things, we've found, wait a minute, there are aspects of old technologies,
you
but
find
again,
new uses for them.
Bloodletting, it's there's a very minute amount of treatments that we can get out of doing these ancient, following the ancient ways. Absolutely. So yeah, science doesn't care about your feelings.
Right.
Science has to be reproduced. It has to be published, and it becomes part of the body of knowledge. Science isn't about what you read on Facebook. It's not about what you posted on Twitter.
Exactly.
And it's not about what you saw on Instagram.
Yep.
Now, social media can be a powerful tool, and it can be great entertainment, but it is absolutely not science. Mm-hmm. And so when everybody thinks that science is done by everyone getting a vote that's called political science, but that's definitely not how science works.
But
And so, for
not,
instance,
supposed to be
when we talk
politicizing
about
this.
COVID will kill you.
Mhm.
Now, it's not you don't get a vote if you get it. You will likely, if you're younger, if you don't have comorbidities, well, likely you will survive. But for that the greatest generation that made huge sacrifices for us,
Mhm.
it's caused havoc for that generation. The sacrifice for us, for the baby boomer generation. Again, they're in their 60s and 70s. It's really taken a huge toll, and also on minorities and groups that have been underserved, underprivileged groups. And so it's not science is not about your opinion. And so, we really have to double down. We have to reinvest in science. For instance, the science of electric vehicles. We're going to go there. It's going to happen. And, I've seen some of these electric vehicles, they're moving fast.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that you're making a huge sacrifice. The ability to charge an electric vehicle. They have superchargers that work quite quickly.
Yep.
And so we can innovate. We can double down on these things. But, we have to have the political will to do it. And we have to have the right people in the right places to make those decisions. That's absolute.
Right. And we have to cut through some of the, to be blunt, some of the rhetorical bullshit that, gets in the way of that. Because, I guess one of the ways that I would come at this, and I try to, help a lot of my conservative friends to see things like this, look at just how much we progressed, again, 50s, 60s, 70s, all the massive innovations that have made the world that we live in today. What drove a lot of that was competition between the economic models. When we looked at like the Soviet model versus what we were doing here, we had to find some way to make it work better, more efficiently. So we started investing more. And if we invested, a public cash into that, but then still allowed private businesses to then run with it and innovate based upon that, we ended up being more efficient. It kind of like, best of both worlds sort of idea there, which the Soviets ultimately couldn't compete with. There were a ton of areas in which they did really, really well, and a lot of them they did really poorly, because that combination really, really helped. And you see a lot of people today really freaking out about competition with China. That China was always going to become a superpower, again, is kind of obvious in terms of broader world history because they were for most of the last several thousand years. It's kind of an anomaly that they were weak for a while. But the competition does worry people, and I get that because, you always want your country to be on top, right? Well, how do you get there? You start investing again. Because they've got high-speed rail all over the place. They're doing tons and tons of investment, and if we keep backing away from that, we were the world leader in solar technology and battery technology. We're not anymore. We've stepped away from it. The Germans and the Chinese are kicking our asses in both areas. The Chinese are now the world leader in solar rollouts and in battery tech. Why?
Absolutely. Well, because the competition. We need to compete, and competition is what capitalism is. That's what it's about. Mm-hmm. And when you have everything funneling into three giant super corporations that control everything from the media all the way down, and when you're subsidizing the lack of innovation,
exactly,
you stifle the progress.
Oh,
and that's what we found. We've stifled our own progress, and a lot of that it's happening in Washington D.C. It's happening in within the houses of Congress. They can't get nothing done, and that's a problem. That's a problem. And so when we're letting China just run with it, we should be competing. They steal our ideas. Sure. They're over here stealing our ideas. What we need to do is we need to double down. We need to be reinvesting in our infrastructure.
Yes, exactly.
Put the money into our infrastructure.
Yep.
And that means electrification. We need to be doubling down on innovation. It was the United States. With Operation Lightspeed, we took and we innovated through pharmaceuticals, and that's how we have the vaccine for COVID. And so, we put the money in, we made the right decisions. And so the United States, we can compete with China. We can compete with everybody now, but it also needs to be a fair playing field. If in China, if they're enslaving entire populations, and doing these sorts of things, well, we need to hold them accountable as well.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so, there's so much. And I remember back in the 90s, I remember Ross Perot saying, about NAFTA and that sucking sound.
Yes.
And, you're going to hear that sucking sound.
Mm-hmm.
We should have always kept a stump of our industry, no matter what, so that we could always rev up. When COVID hit, we couldn't even make masks.
Yeah, exactly. We couldn't make masks.
Nothing. So we should have had a certain amount of capability here always. Whether it's making shoes, whether it's making masks, durable medical equipment, whatever it happens to be, a certain amount of it should always be done here in the United States. And we need to invest in that. We need to be doing the right things.
Right.
So, absolutely. There's
always a balancing act. You can shift to more services, you can shift to more trade, but if you give up completely, then worst case, you're screwed. And it's a matter of, again, being prepared. There's a really good point you hit a moment ago that I really want. It's an opportunity, I guess, for me to pick on Issa a bit because I'm not a fan. Okay, so thinking in terms of the way that those subsidies, think about fossil fuel subsidies, for example, actually greatly limit our innovative ability, because as long as the money is pouring into those industries, then it actually discourages, it removes the market incentives to move things along. It removes the market incentives to make the stuff cheaper for us, and to roll more and more of it out. So we're dumping tons of, I see people pushing based on the gas prices here. Oh, this is why we should keep drilling. And yeah, ICE is always for more drilling and then denying solar rollouts there. But if we drill more here, it doesn't actually create energy independence. And I think this is a weird myth that a lot of people have. They think if we increase our output, then we'll become energy independent. No, we still continue to import. We just start exporting as well because we're part of a global market. And whatever happens, however much we produce, we could produce twice as much oil as we're doing today. The prices would still be set internationally, not here. Because that's how the global economies work for 5 centuries now. We're interconnected too tightly. And that's not going to change anytime soon. So if we drill for more, we don't become independent. We can become independent if we start actually producing more of it here, using our own innovation. I mean, think about the sunlight down there in San Diego County. Yes, we could be world leaders in a lot of these areas and take care of our energy needs. If we'd been rolling this stuff out for the last few decades, we wouldn't be facing a lot of the challenges we've got now. But, heck, Carter put solar panels on the roof of the White House in the 70s, and Reagan took them right back off. We've just stopped trying to actually improve these areas and left it entirely to the market while dumping massive subsidies in, which harms the markets. It reduces that competition.
That's correct. So the way that you can do better, and so that you don't have these totalitarian dictators like Vladimir Putin, who has control of a vast amount of fossil fuel, is to divest ourselves of that addiction.
Exactly.
To fossil fuel. And so the more that we put in solar panels with battery backup, the more that we create a stronger grid and create microgrids so that the whole thing doesn't come falling down upon us.
Perfect.
The more that we do the right thing, the more we do electrification of new buildings, the more that we insulate buildings and use higher efficiency, that's a matter of national security. That's what makes it to where people like OPEC, Vladimir Putin, the dictator in Venezuela, what happens is fossil fuels prop up these dictators, and the fossil fuel industry is self-serving. And when it comes to business, that's what business is supposed to do. That's what they do. It's provide a profit for the shareholders, and that's what they're supposed to do. But we have to be smart enough as the populace to understand where we need to go. And we have the technology, we have the ability. But unfortunately, what happens is politics is corrupted with money. And so, like you said, to pick on someone like Issa, he is probably one of the richest members of Congress. He's been in there the longest, and he needs to go. He needs to go. And he's isolated and insulated himself with wealth. And it's sad to see he's completely disconnected from the populace. This This is somebody who voted against the infrastructure bill, but he promised to fix all of our freeways when he was running. So you can't have it both ways. Mm-hmm. He took $400,000 for his multi-million-dollar real estate business in the first round of coronavirus relief with the first act. And then he voted against everyone else getting that $1,400 payment, which I didn't even get. Yep. So he voted against. So he doesn't want you to get bailed out, but he's a multi-millionaire. He voted for himself to get that bailout. Yep. And then he claims to be for veterans. But just last week, he voted against the bill that would provide medical treatment to veterans who have contracted cancer and other chronic illnesses from burn pits over the years and years of their service, their honorable service in our military. Mm-hmm. This is somebody who was discharged dishonorably. This is somebody who could not even pass the background check to serve on the Trump administration. And we saw what a cast of characters that were serving. He couldn't even pass that. So, he is completely disconnected from us. Right. He voted to not certify the election and went against the Constitution itself. So you can't claim that you support the Constitution, but then violate the Constitution. So it's absolutely horrendous. And so he'll try to hold the party line, supposedly, but only for the election. And then he will do everything he can for his own self-centered self-worth. And he will do nothing for the populace. And so that's why he absolutely needs to go.
Yeah, it's repulsive, the number of people in Congress who are essentially able to buy their seats. They bring in tons of cash themselves or they sell out to so many different lobbyists. And if somebody is giving you a ton of cash, I mean, I've joked for years that I think people in Congress should wear NASCAR jackets with their owners on them. Because, if you are taking that much money in, you're paying much more attention to what they need than what we need. And so I'm not going to get a $1,400 check because I can't write, a $14,000 check to Daryl Issa. But he's going to lap at that trough and take as much of that, corporate welfare as he can for himself, just like we're always handing this cash out to the rich because they can afford to buy lobbyists and the lobbyists can afford to buy people in Congress. And people like Issa are among the worst of the worst in this kind of abuse. And one of the things that taking that money does is it causes them to take such tremendously destructive positions and ones that are really counter to the interests of their own district. I mean, the whole question of fossil fuels, again, is a really big one for the district. And it's a shame that Republicans have gotten so good at the messaging on this that they can get away with saying, drill, baby, drill. And we all, that'll bring, and you don't have Democrats standing up and saying, well, that actually won't bring energy independence because we're part of a global market. It's literally impossible for that to bring energy independence. All it can do is enrich a handful of oil companies and continue to put us at the mercy of Maduro in Venezuela and, the Russians. And, let's be honest here, some of our friends too, like the Saudis, the Emiratis, oil props up the Algerian police state. It propped up Gaddafi for years. I mean, a lot of really bad governments are cranking out tons and tons of oil, and they're all going to benefit from this. So we're propping up terrible governments with massive human rights abuses. I mean, you see people really, really angry about the corruption and the Venezuelan economy being driven into the ground. Okay, well, why not move away from oil? Because that's the only thing that's able to prop that up. If he wasn't able to depend upon the oil, he would actually have to be more democratic because the people would not tolerate it. As long as he's got the oil cash coming in, he can throw enough money out there that he can rig his own elections and keep going in there. It's the same thing with Putin. Russia's a petrostate. They have been for years. If not for oil and gas, they would have collapsed already financially. It would force them to diversify, but it would also help us. Solar, no one can own it. No one can monopolize that. No one can take it away from it. No foreign dictator can stop it. No war can stop it. There's no way that somebody can, spread a tarp across the United States and cut us off from our energy supply. If we went solar and wind, we would be energy independent and unstoppably energy independent.
That's right. And getting back to the whole issue of corruption and campaign finance, I have taken zero from any corporation and from any of those corporate interests. I have run nothing but grassroots campaigns when I ran for the city council and in this run for mayor. And so, I mean, I ran for mayor and actually almost unseated the incumbent in Santee, and now my run for Congress. And so, it's a grassroots effort. It's getting out there, having dialogue with people. That is the key. That is the key to success. That's how you run when you're in a area that is, heavily weighted right now towards R. It's a plus 10. But it's not that Darrell Issa is so popular, because he isn't. No one even likes the guy. No. He's never going to go door to door. He's an entitled rich guy. He has nothing in common with anyone in California 48. He doesn't even live here. No. He lives in a whole different district, and that's just crazy. But I've spent the time. I've spent the years as an activist, as a council member. I've been, and just someone who just happens to love this place. Right. As a mountain biker, I've traveled from one end of this county to the other, and all across this great nation. And we need to take it back. We need to take it back. We need to take it back from guys like Darrell Issa. We need to kick him out. He is that swamp they talked about.
Yes.
Perfect. Is that swamp.
Yes.
He needs to go.
Thank you.
And he is, and he's done everything wrong. And so it's a matter of getting out there, having the dialogue. The D's are going to vote for the D's, the R's are going to vote for the R's. But we need to have the dialogue. We need to talk about everyone in the middle. We need to really reach out to those no party preference individuals. We need to reach out to those that are independent. And we also need to stand by what we say when we run. And so you don't just sell out later. And I've never sold out. I've fought for my community. I walk the walk. I talk the talk. I do what I say. I say what I do. And so campaign finance reform is absolutely necessary. And as far as, voting rights, we need the right to vote. Everyone should have the right to vote. If everyone's voice should be heard. And so disenfranchisement, yet again, another just horrible thing. We shouldn't be disenfranchising each other. We all count. We are all Americans. And so it's time. It's time to stand up. It's time to be counted. It's time to throw people out like Darrell Issa. Get him out of there. He's been there forever. He doesn't actually achieve anything except for saying no.
Well, for his wealthy backers, he gets things for them, but for us, no, nothing at all. I love the use. I love the use of the word swamp there. This is one of the ways that some of the tribalism honestly gets in the way of just understanding, a good point or good framing. 90% of Americans all across party lines understand that there is a lot of corruption in our politics, and that corruption comes from big moneyed interests. They understand the problem with lobbyists, and they understand the problem of long-term incumbency. Tons of Americans are united on this issue, and yet we completely ignore it. Trump calling to drain the swamp honestly helped him with a ton of independents, and it helped swing, a number. I mean, there were a lot of those, most of them did not, but something like, 10 to 12% of the populist independents who supported Bernie in the primary flipped to Trump in the general. Those are votes that would have been ours. And they're because of the rhetoric. Most people are never going to pay enough attention to the details. They're going to hear what you say. And when you say, drain the swamp, we've got a bunch of career politicians here, they're sucking up to lobbyists, that resonates with a lot of people. And if we can step up and recognize that, running a grassroots campaign is a way to actually, serve the voters first, to serve the people in your district, not the people who are writing checks from all across the country. I think a lot of us are really forgetting about that. And I want to take it to a broader point that you mentioned a minute ago here, and something that I said earlier we wanted to come back to because it came up one other time too. This reaching out across to people. 45% of this country are independents, and that's not based upon just their views. I mean, I'm consistently to the left, but I frequently have been an independent, because, it's hard to fall along with just the, my party right or wrong, when really the issues kind of matter to most voters. And that's something that a lot of politicians don't pay as much attention to. They tend to pursue the bases. So the R will pursue the R's, the D will pursue the D's, and you just ignore the people in the middle and let them naturally self-select. But if you engage in those conversations, if you explain to people how this works, I mean, I've had conversations with people who were registered Republicans who sat down with me and said, well, how are you going to pay for crazy things like all this Medicare, Green New Deal, all this stuff that Democrats are talking about? They're talking about this crazy stuff. They're crazy stuff. How would anybody pay for that? And I just walked them through the financing for it and took seriously their concerns. And I think a lot of people don't do that. If we try to meet people where they are and hear their concerns, then there's a way to help people to understand where you're coming from. And I personally think that the engagement, and you're talking about running for city council. I mean, Santee's a pretty conservative area. Being able to serve on city council, you have to have had a lot of those same conversations where you're trying to tell people, like, this is where I stand, this is what I believe. And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in your experience, when you reach people that way, when you tell them what you believe and where you stand, people can respect you for that.
That's right. Having the dialogue is the key. Listening, and then being thoughtful with your response. Mm-hmm. Telling people where you stand, and also sometimes agreeing to disagree. Yeah. But we can try to meet in the middle, and that's the key. And that's been the key to my success in the past, and that's what will be the key to my success in the future, is meeting in the middle. And so, what happens is you have tribalism. You have people that are so far on the right and the left, and it's got to be everything or nothing. And if it's always everything or nothing, well, guess what? You're probably gonna get nothing. And so we can make advances in every aspect. All is not lost. Let's take, you were talking about Medicare. I remember back in 1993 when Bill Clinton was elected, and he came up and he had a card, and everybody was going to get this special card, and we were going to go into a universal health care. It went down in a terrible way. It never happened. It simply didn't happen. So there was a push for a Medicare for all in 1993, long before a lot of people who will be voting in this next election were born. Mm-hmm. And we haven't advanced. We had the Obamacare, and there was aspects that were good and bad. Some people's premiums went up astronomically, mm-hmm. and then now there was an attempt to shore that up, with some of the programs. But we need to go further, because most people don't use healthcare when they're in the middle of their lifespan. So when they're like between 18 and 55-ish, you might not ever even go to the hospital ever. Most healthcare is when you're very, very young. When you're first born, you're in the hospital. We're all mostly born in the hospital. Yeah. And most of us, we're going to die in a hospital. You might think that there's midwives that you're going to be born at home. No, that was back in the Old West. That's not how it goes. And for good reason, because infant mortality rates were quite high. Mm-hmm. And so we need to make sure that the youngest, the most vulnerable, are covered, because it costs a lot of money to have a child. And we need more babies. We need more babies out there. Babies are beautiful. Yeah. And so we need to have what I call Medikid for those that are from birth or before birth up to 18. All that should be covered. Why are we watching commercials for like St. Jude and the Shriners of these children with cancer, and they're having to beg us for money? Yeah. Why is that not funded? Those children have cancer because of decisions made by our society for many, many years. Mm-hmm. There's just toxins, things happen. And so those children should be covered. And thus, my proposal, Medikid, cover the kids. Now, on the other end, most people, you qualify for Medicare when you're 65, but some people will have put off a certain amount of care from maybe in their late 50s. So really what we should do is advance Medicare to where you can qualify for Medicare when you're 55. Mm-hmm. That way you could retire. Some people are ready to retire and enjoy their life. And so we should incrementally expand Medicare immediately for those 55 and older now, right? So that when you start having that maybe a little bit of a chest pain or something, and you just keep you're going to hit it. Oh, Betsy, remember Sanford and Son? I'm coming. Well, you could come in and get that fixed simply, and you would have a much longer, much healthier life.
Right.
And you'll use less of healthcare expenditures in those years by not having that heart failure. Heart failure is, let's face it, that's how most people die.
Right.
You die from heart failure. Your heart eventually gives out. And so, we could be working on incremental improvements now instead of it all or nothing. One side saying, no, we can't afford it. The other side saying, we want it all. And that's what we did in 93, and we didn't get it. And now it's been 30 years where, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
So we can do this. We can do that. It's the same with, like we talked about, energy. Mm-hmm. We can fix our infrastructure, our energy infrastructure. We can fix the physical infrastructure. There's so much that can be done.
Yeah.
We also, we can, through dialogue, find out, like I learned, that when I go door to door and talk to people, we have much more in common than our differences.
Right.
And then that humanizes each other. Because if all you do is go on Facebook and you're an idiot, you're an idiot, you're an idiot.
Right.
It's so easy to do. I can sit behind a keyboard, or an individual can sit behind a keyboard and say, I hate you. But you know what? It's when you are seeing each other person to person the way, it once was, you would never speak that way to each other.
Oh, no.
You would never have the same conversations as these comments and these memes you see on social media. You would just never have done that. It's time to bring back the dialogue, folks.
It really is.
It's time to see each other for who we are. We're all Americans.
Yeah, that classic retail politics, that reaching out to people, going where they are, having meetings, town halls. I mean, how many of these Republicans never bother to have a town hall at all? And if they do, it's tightly scripted. They control which questions are out there, or it's done all just, by telephone and totally everything's filtered through, or it's pre-recorded, or you're not actually engaging with people. And we need to maintain that kind of connection. We need to build more of that human connection, because if we don't see where people are and where they're coming from, if we can't humanize the other side, this is one of the things that I run into a lot in studying violent extremism, is you see so many people that, because they never actually encounter the other side. I've run into, I've spent a lot of time living over in Israel and Palestine, and I've run into so many people that have never met a Palestinian or have never met an Israeli, depending on where they are. And when I put them in the room and they talk to each other and they realize we're all human, we just want to take care of our kids and go to school and, not have to worry so much, it helps to cut through some of the divisive rhetoric that both sides are going to get. Because you can actually see someone, you can see their face, you can see in their eyes, and you can recognize something there. No matter what our differences are, no matter where we come from or what our political differences are, if we can just talk to each other respectfully, we can actually get somewhere. And I think for me, that's what I hear when you say something like meet someone in the middle. Because oftentimes the policy aiming for the middle in terms of policies ends up backfiring in many ways, but you get there by taking someone takes their position, the other person takes their position, but you humanize each other and you engage in dialogue and you talk. The end result is more in the middle, because it comes about through compromise, and those natural compromises, that happens, that's fine. I have no issues with there. I often tend to dislike the kind of preemptive surrender, that says I'll just shift to the middle. Well, that just moves the other side further over, because at the end of the day, our politics is inherently tribalistic. It's become much more so since the 1990s, but it was always a bit problematic there. But if we're able to have the dialogue, if we're able to have conversations, somebody is out there, I want completely private healthcare, blah, 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 and they should be able to rip me off if they want to. Okay, cool. I want Medicare for all. Let's talk and see where we end up. And you can actually take those steps forward. People forget that when they rolled out Medicare under Johnson, they were talking about it as stages then. That this was going to be a first step. We're going to take care of the oldest Americans, and then we're going to move it down to 55, and then we'll start seeing what we can go from there, because every other developed country was doing this. And we just somehow dropped the ball on that.
We lost our way.
Yeah.
We lost our way.
Yeah, and if we had been doing that a little bit at a time, we could have avoided a lot of that divisiveness.
This is what happens is a business can make more money when you're chronically ill. So by curing you, there, it doesn't, you can't make as much money.
Yeah.
And so, but again, what our founding fathers talked about: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is what it's about. And when we talk about life, that's your health.
Yes.
That's your health. And so, we've come so far. We spend more on healthcare, but I'll tell you what, when you watch a sporting event, how many insurance companies or commercials do you see? How many banners for insurance companies? That's all money that's diverted from your life, from you receiving the care. And I am an expert in Medicare. That is what I do for Sharp Healthcare, is I analyze Medicare, and upwards of a quarter of our gross domestic product, of our GDP, is spent going back into healthcare,
right?
The service of healthcare. It costs a fortune,
right?
And so again, just those two proposals that I'm talking about, taking care of the youngest and then expanding it to the oldest, what that's going to do is it's going to knock down those expenditures, and then it makes it achievable for everyone in the middle.
Right.
So that then you can, if you are happy with your employer-based healthcare, like I am, I work for a hospital. They provide excellent healthcare, and they should. And we're all vested in it. And then what we do is we can slowly expand. So when maybe, for Medicare, for Medikid, when you go to college, the benefit is you can stay on Medikid. And that way, you're not killing yourself working a job while you're going to college. And then we can start reinvesting in those sciences. Right. You can become an engineer. We can have people become a doctor here, and becoming a doctor takes many, many years of studying, of internships, of residencies. It's a big deal. And we're bringing doctors from India. We're bringing doctors from China. A huge amount of our workforce and nurses comes from the Philippines and India as well. And so what's happening is, we're bringing in, these are critical workers, and I absolutely support bringing in critical workers. Absolutely. And I support them achieving citizenship as well. Talking about things that make sense. Citizenship for critical workers. Absolutely. It makes sense. Same thing with dreamers. Young people that have been here their whole life and have gone through college and they've been educated. Let's let them work. Let's give citizenship to these dreamers. These are fiscally conservative ideals.
Yes, they are.
These aren't radical.
No.
And let's modernize the Modernization of Farmworkers Act. We need people that are willing to help, prop up our agricultural sector, and it makes sense. And again, these are all three of these are real simple reforms in immigration. But you'll have a guy like Darrell Issa that'll say, build a taller wall. The wall is there. I remember it being built in the 80s. Yeah. The wall is already built. It's actually like it's a wall with like with a fence and like a road. I mean, it's the real deal down there at the border. I've lived here my whole life. I know. I watched it being built. And but building a wall out into the abyss, deep into the desert, it doesn't stop anybody. Nope. So it makes no sense. What you want to do is, instead of building a structure, a great wall of China type thing, is you invest in drones. You invest in your human resource, in your Border Patrol agents, who spend a great amount of their time actually saving people that have been abandoned by those coyotes, by bringing them water and medical care. That's what's going on. It's a humanitarian crisis out there. So when they say there's a crisis that was brought up by this administration, all I've seen is a border crisis my whole life. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm running for 48, and I'm 48 years old. So I've been seeing it happen my whole life. So to peg it onto one administration, it's been the way for probably countless generations. We have the Kumeyaay band of natives here in San Diego, and their band extends down and across the border. There was no wall there at that time. They moved freely. And so, when we talk about immigration reform, we should be doing the fiscally conservative thing And again, citizenship for critical workers. It makes sense. We need doctors. We need nurses. Nurses are quitting in mass right now. Doctors are having complete emotional fatigue after watching so many people die. Our agricultural sector, everything costs more. Everything costs more. We need workers. And the dreamers, they've been here their whole life. They only have one home. This is their home. So again, Darrell Issa is going to take some crazy party line and build a wall. He obviously has no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah. Oh man. There's so many good ones there. The wall rhetoric is just amazing. I often remind people, especially, again, Republican friends, I'll tell them, go back and pull up video of the 1980 primary debates where you had George Bush Sr. and Ronald Reagan talking about immigration. And the language today, I mean, a lot of Democrats don't even talk like that way anymore. I mean, we used to understand this a lot better. And quite honestly, a lot of the policies that we've pursued to build up so much of that, building up the walls there, actually created a large part of the huge undocumented population we have, because it made it harder to go back and forth. It made it harder to leave. They would come here, work seasonally, and they used to be able to go home, and they can't anymore. So they're trapped here. And we just completely ignore that. Building a higher and higher wall doesn't change the economic realities. People are coming here because there are jobs. Well, honestly, we've had a net outflow to Mexico for some time because the Mexican economy improved. So people are coming from farther and farther afield, but there's always going to be jobs here because we are a dynamic, growing economy. So we need to find some ways to make it easier for people to come legally into the country and take those jobs instead of constantly wasting taxpayer money trying to militarize something in a way that cannot possibly stop it. You're in the middle of the frickin' desert, you put up a wall there, someone's going to lay a ladder there and climb right over it. And by the time you get there with your cars, they're gone. I mean, how did you solve that? Or they're just going to go underneath it like sappers, or they're going to blow a hole in it. I mean, they showed right away when Trump was rolling out his chunks of like his new improved wall there, somebody came along with a nice, saw and cut right through it in seconds. I mean, you're always going to be able to innovate your way around a wall. I mean, when we transitioned into the early modern period and people introduced cannons, it kind of like destroyed the old logic of walls. European cities used to all be surrounded by walls. They were all torn down because they're useless. They don't stop anyone from getting in or out anymore.
That's correct. I'll tell you, in Scotland, I was born in Scotland because I'm a citizen born abroad. And in Scotland, every castle, I used to wonder, every castle was blown down. All the walls were blown down. And, the only castles that were left were up on the top of these hills. And so I would ask my family, I'd say, what's up with all the castles? And they said that it was the Scots themselves that blew up all those castles because they would be governed by, foreign forces, which to them were the English, and they would run it back into those walled castles. Mm-hmm. And so they hated the castles. And so I was always fascinated by, castles and all that stuff. But when you look into the reality, you learn that it's completely different than what you might have thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. They're not that effective.
The Great Wall of China didn't work.
No, it did not.
The Raiders made it around it. Mm-hmm. And so, what you have to do is you should be building bridges. You should be building bridges. For instance, there's this incredible bridge to Mexico to the airport. And so from San Diego, we can go there, and instead of going down to the border and suffering for hours and hours on end, we can go directly to the Tijuana airport, and we can have access to all these places all over that we've never had access to before, unless we suffered. And so that's an ingenious, and it was in capitalism drove that, because you pay a fee. You pay a fee, you go through, and you go down directly into the airport, and then you make your flight. And it's a great thing. That's what we should be doing. We should be building bridges, not building walls. And so, and I'm not saying that it should be a free for all. Oh, no. I'm absolutely not saying no free for all. But again, we should support our Border Patrol agents. Right. We should do the right thing. And so, and then, like you said, there's jobs here. Mm-hmm. People would probably rather go back to their families. Right. And so, exactly. It's a crisis. It's a crisis we created. And going back to what you said about like Reagan back in the 80s, he would be considered a liberal now.
Mm-hmm. At least on that issue, yeah, there's a handful
Yeah.
of ones. I mean, again, people forget that. I mean, Nixon ran on universal health care and a basic income, and we're like, what? Like, I mean, it's amazing just how many things have changed. And because one of the things driving that is just we stopped talking to each other and fell into these partisan camps. And it just got harder and harder to actually work for the American people. But we used to be able to much more easily fashion a bipartisan consensus on things that actually help improve people's lives. You mentioned the number of physicians and nurses that come here from abroad, right? And I'm sure all of us have seen this going into, the doctor's offices or whatever, just how many foreign-born physicians there are. And that's fine. People should be able to come here and pursue the American dream. That's great. Let them do that. But one of the things that's helping to drive that is poor policy here, because we've made education so incredibly costly that people can no longer easily go to college in order to climb into that middle class dream anymore. So when people are worried, you have so many people, and this is very true in both of our areas all across the inland part of California. You have a lot of people that are really worried about the declining American dream, and they've been told to blame immigrants for that. And that's simply not what's driving all of this. I mean, the American dream would work for everyone if we simply made it affordable for people here in the first place. We don't do that anymore. If we were investing in, when the University of California was created, you've got a UC campus down there in San Diego, we've got them all over the place here. The University of California was created to be tuition free. I mean, it was created as a way to provide the essential skills, the STEM workers that we needed to kind of like help with the space program and everything else that we were doing at the time, and, help push more Americans into that middle class life to pursue that American dream. And when some people go in, because not everyone's going to go to college, it actually helps the entire economy. As long as they don't come out so saddled by debt that they're stuck treading water. If you're able to actually, go in, get that education, and then, work and spend money, then it's going to help trickle down to everybody else, because then people are able to, afford to add on to their houses or buy more things, go out to eat more often. It's just, it's basic capitalism, essentially. And we've completely forgotten how a lot of this stuff works and how investment in Americans really works.
That's right. Education it's so important. And what they've done is they're profiteering.
Mm-hmm.
The profiteering
Right.
off of education, especially a lot of these private institutions.
Mm-hmm.
There was I think it was like $25 million settlement for Ashford University just yesterday. They're basically junk degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a horrible thing. And so, I am all about, people should be able to go to community college, and it shouldn't be so expensive.
Yeah.
We should be providing that. And so when you get down to the issues, everyone can agree a couple years of community college for free. I went to community college when I finished high school. It is excellent. And we have excellent community colleges.
Absolutely.
Now, when somebody goes on to get a degree, say a nurse or a doctor, they're saddled by massive debt. We should absolutely be considering forgiving some of that debt, especially in this time of COVID, where these people like myself, we have made incredible sacrifices for society. It's like a war. Mm-hmm. It is a war. And yet, I remember in the beginning, we would do the 8:00 cheer. I used to do it every night. I'd be out there and, when COVID first hit, cheering on our first responders, our firefighters, our officers, nurses, doctors. Now it's an afterthought. Now we're being assaulted in the hospital. Right. We're being assaulted by people that are denying. When you tell them they have COVID, they say, no, we don't. They don't believe in it. And again, science isn't about you getting an opinion. When you're sick, you're sick. And so, you should really defer. And it's sad to see. It's sad to see. And so, education is key. If you're educated in science, then you can, practice, building the body of knowledge and participating. Mm-hmm. But when all you've done is get on Facebook and you think that now you've done some research, that's not research.
Right. No,
that's not research. Research is when you actually have a control group and you have an experimental group, and then you give, the control group a placebo or whatnot, and then the other get the medicine or whatever it happens to be, and then you look at the difference. That's science. Mm-hmm. And so, we need to get back to it. And we need to make it affordable and achievable. And then on the back end, we should be, either making sure it doesn't go up beyond the rate of inflation. It shouldn't be going up at 2, 300% faster than the rate of inflation.
Yes, yes.
So
Which
now
we've
if
had
somebody,
housing
you go
crisis,
to a private
healthcare,
university,
education. Oh yeah.
Yeah, if you're going to a private university and you made that decision and you have the money, that's great. Like I went to USD. It was expensive, but now it is incredibly expensive. So when you go to UCSD, when you go to SDSU, when you go into those UC schools and those state schools, we really should be making sure that that it's achievable. Mm-hmm. That's achievable and not being saddled with massive debt. And right, absolutely, right. Community college should be free or at least close to being free.
And this is another place where taking an incremental approach and actually just tackling the more achievable goals makes a great deal of sense. Right, talking about improving community colleges, we already take care of a K through 12. Add 2 years. What does it really add on there? Given that there's a massive economic benefit to that, it helps all of us if there's a more educated workforce and it's affordable. The costs have gone up for housing, for healthcare, for education far faster than incomes have gone up. So it's
Absolutely.
taken it more and more out of reach for more people, which means that, the U.S. is down to like 17th or 18th in terms of social mobility. We're falling steadily there, such that it's harder and harder to pursue that American dream and climb up out of poverty. And we should be trying to make it easier, to help people to actually improve their own situation in life. And I think that that's an important area where we actually could reach across and build larger coalitions. Because oftentimes when we talk about these issues, we run into basic moral objections. Think about the debt forgiveness issue. For some people, it's a moral issue. It has to all be wiped out. For other people, it's a moral issue. You took on those debts. You need to pay them. And they stop discussion at that point. It's hard to get past, a hard moral disagreement like that. And there is a way to do it, though. When we start talking about the broader economic impact for everybody, the fact that if you cut some of that expense down, if you lower some of the costs by instead of dumping more cash into these loan corporations that hand loans out and then make money off of Americans, if you instead dump more of that money into the public education system so it lowered the tuition costs, people could still afford to pay a tuition. You used to be able to work a part-time job and afford to go to college. No one can do that now. You're all stuck either being A, already rich with rich parents, or B, being stuck with massive debt. And that debt hurts everybody, not just the people who are in there. And when we talk about it in those moral terms, it's easy for someone to say, well, they took that on. Who cares? It's their choice. It's their problem. But it's actually our problem too. It's everyone's problem.
Yeah, we have a debt crisis.
We do.
We have a debt crisis. The millennial generation has been, they have been saddled with a huge encumbrance in debt, and it's not as easy for them to make it, and it's a very sad thing. My father was a machinist, my mom was a homemaker, and they bought a brand new home in 1979, and off of a single income, and that home, was where I was growing up. But, my parents divorced, and, I came upon hard times as a young person. I ended up sleeping on the couch. We had to rent out the bedrooms of the house. And, I started working as young as I could. And, I started working, fast food and as a dishwasher, and really trying to pull myself up by my bootstraps. Mm-hmm. And going to community college, I used to work all night. I used to work night shifts, and then I would go straight to college in the morning, and then I would sleep in the evenings. It was tough. It was tough, and I worked my way up, and I was lucky that I was able to do that. And I put myself through nursing school, and it was tough. Now for the younger generation, it's unachievable to do what I did. They can't even do that.
Yeah.
They'd be saddled with and they are being saddled with massive debt. When I went back for my master's degrees, I have a master's in nursing and an MBA. I went to USD, which was expensive, but it was nothing compared to what it is now. It was nothing. That was I went back in 2001, 2002, 2003. And in 20 years, that would be unachievable for me. And I worked my way through. I was the poor guy there were people from all over the world who were very, very wealthy that I went to school with. And I was like the one guy from San Diego, one of the very few. And so that's what's happened now. And I'm all for helping, educating people from all over the world and such. But we also need to make it achievable for those that are here.
Right. Exactly.
And so, yeah, it's much harder. And getting those jobs is even harder now. So, I was lucky that, at the time I could work as a younger person, working fast food. Now I would be competing with full grown men. I'd be back as a 14, 15, 16-year-old. I was able to get those jobs. Now it's much more difficult. So we have to, there is an aspect of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. That's true.
Yes.
However, when the forces are set against you and so massively, then it'd be nice, there should be a little bit of help and there should be a little bit of understanding. And so just because I pulled myself up by my bootstraps doesn't mean I'm pulling up that ladder behind me. And that's what people do. They're like, well, I didn't get any forgiveness. I paid for mine. But you have to understand that it hinders the entire economy. Right. And so we have to do the right thing. We should be given forgiveness and we should be looking at it. That we could do things of nature of like the Conservation Corps. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done in Urban Corps. There's so much outreach that can be done. And then when people do those excellent jobs, then they should receive forgiveness if possible. Because let's face it, Conservation Corps, Urban Corps, those jobs don't pay. They don't pay, but we need those people.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And so we need to look at and also, looking at the way the funding of elementary, it's all based on where you are. And so the tax base of that region. So if you're a rich kid and that, your parents are paying a certain amount of taxes, that's what funds those elementary schools. And so they get another leg up there. Whereas for underserved communities, if the tax base is not strong, there's no funding for those schools. And so, that creates a whole other vicious cycle of poverty. And there's so much restructuring in education that needs to be looked at. It needs to be done. And then make it achievable. And there should be a job on the other side. There needs to be a job on the far end of that. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there are so many issues of generational poverty that are created by these sort of structural conditions. And I think we miss sight of some of this stuff and people fall into, again, a lot of those rhetorical traps about the whole free stuff and the moral issues here. Because it's not about handouts and free stuff and everything else here. It's not about equality of outcome either, because at the end of the day, how hard we work should still have an impact on how well we do. We should be able to put the work in and actually try to improve ourselves and not just depend upon somebody else to just, here you go, and hand it to you. But when you talk about equality of opportunity, what you're talking about is breaking down the systemic barriers. You're breaking down the barriers that make it harder for people to pursue these things. Because if you make it harder for a poor person to pursue the right kind of career that they want or the education they want or anything there, then what you're doing is you're throwing away what might be the next real innovator. The next, Nikola Tesla could be laboring somewhere there in a family that has no possibility of getting him an education. And, he's never going to be able to pursue those things. We have tons of genius in this country, but by setting up so many barriers, by erecting so many barriers to stop people from being able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, it's sort of like, here, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And then I look down and I have no shoes, right? It's just not a fair situation in that way. We don't want, total fairness. You don't want free stuff for everybody, but you do need to remove the barriers that we're placing in people's way. And the rising cost of housing, the rising cost of education, the rising cost of healthcare are pricing Americans out of the American dream. And I think that's an issue that people in the Democratic and Republican Party, independents, libertarians, anybody should be able to get around and say, hey, we should be helping people to succeed here instead of forcing more and more Americans into poverty.
We need to nurture our middle class. It's the innovation comes from the middle class. And, as someone who was in the middle class, I feel like I'm an endangered species. And so people in the middle class, we are an endangered species. Yeah. We're the ones that pay the taxes, by the way. My tax burden is massive. But people like Issa, the guy probably pays no taxes,
Right.
because he isolates and insulates himself from that. And so, they're not, and whatever. I mean, the tax code should be rewritten, and people like him shouldn't be able to be crooks. But you know what? I want the lights to stay on. I want the roads to not be full of potholes, and so someone's got to do it. And unfortunately, it falls on the middle class. And so that's why, that's the economic engine of this country. And so we want to nurture those that can join us in this middle class.
Right.
That's what the American experiment was all about. That's what the world saw. That's what the world emulated. And it's not about having the richest people in the world. Some of the richest people in the world are down in Mexico, but also the poorest. Mm-hmm. It's the same with, places like, in the Middle East. You see these terrible, terrible amounts of wealth inequities. Mm-hmm. And so what makes the United States of America great is that middle class, that economic engine. And right. It's just much, much better. And, the lights have to stay on, when the traffic lights all go out, and, it's an inconvenience for all, whether you're the richest or the poorest.
Right.
And, when the roads are full of potholes, it knocks out everyone's headlamp on their car. And, you end up having to go work on your vehicle. So you pay anyway. And so, people say, what about homelessness? Fix homelessness. Well, homelessness is multifaceted. To fix the problem with homelessness, you need to analyze what is going on with this individual. What led them there? Because it took a lifetime to get there. Were they in the foster system? Was it drugs? Was it bad circumstances? What led that? And then you have to tailor that solution. And often what I found is, as a nurse, is the solutions would come when they hit rock bottom and end up in the hospital. And then we would get them those resources, because we didn't want to just put them back out to the street. And right. So you have to look at the root issue. And so, with, and a lot of times it's poverty. If you were an orphan and you were in the foster system, and then you just get kicked out when you're 18, you're going to be homeless. That's an impossible. And they may have had terrible trauma while they went through that system, or from, their parents, or who knows what. You have to treat the underlying cause. If it's drug addiction, you have to treat the addiction. You can't go and build your way out of it by building more $1 million homes up on the hill and say you're going to solve the housing crisis. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. You have to transition people over time. They may have to go into an area of a group home existence to learn how to just do their basic care of themselves. And then they need to have a job. You can't even, you can't just go from homeless to going and getting a job. Where are you going to take a shower? Where are you going to sleep at night? What about security? Having, not just getting beat up by somebody who's going to take what you got. Right. And so, homelessness, or really it's houselessness, is important of an issue. But again, it's not being addressed properly. There was a forum held by Issa more recently, in the last week, about the fentanyl issue. Now, as a nurse, I've known about fentanyl. It's existed for a long, long time. I would have never imagined that it would be used in recreational drugs. And so you think about it. Do you think people want to take fentanyl? They absolutely do not. What happens is drug dealers put the fentanyl into the drugs that they want, whatever it happens to be, and that's what causes the overdose. And because fentanyl, we use it to put people under when they have surgery. When you're having surgery, we need to make it to where you don't move. And so we put you on a respirator, and we give you very teeny weeny amounts of fentanyl, and it causes apnea. And then we have the ventilator to keep you going. And then we do the surgery. We follow the science. And so what's happening is fentanyl is being put into these drugs. And then when somebody unsuspectingly takes the drug, it has fentanyl and it kills them. Mm-hmm. So if you want to say, well, we're going to make fentanyl a Schedule 1, that's not going to fix the problem.
No.
What we need to do is treat the people that are using the drugs so that they don't use the drug, so that the drug dealer doesn't cut the drug with the fentanyl that results in their death. Mm-hmm. That's what's going on. But again, not thinking about it, and then, putting people into the criminal justice system for drug abuse, which is a health issue. It's not a moral issue. It's a issue of health.
Mm-hmm.
And so the opioid crisis is being managed incorrectly. And so let's say somebody who has terrible pain, and so then they were given OxyContin. But what happens is then when they go through the acute stage of their pain, they come out the other end addicted to the drug. Mm-hmm. We have to treat them. They are Americans, and it's not a moral issue. It's that this drug has changed the chemical makeup of their brain to where they feel that they need to take it. And this is something that needs to be done across, because this is killing a whole generation.
Right.
And it's a terrible, terrible thing. But again, creating a law to outlaw, we should not be allowing drug dealers to put fentanyl in the drugs. I get that. That makes sense. But we shouldn't be putting people behind bars who overdosed on fentanyl on accident when we should have been treating them for their drug addiction or whatever it was.
Right.
And so, yeah, we have so far to go. The war on drugs was a war on the American people.
Oh, gosh, yes.
And it didn't work. It's not a war on drugs. It was a war on people,
mm-hmm.
a war on Americans.
Yeah.
And so we need to treat people. We need to help them to kick the bad habits. And we need to look at ways to keep people out of the criminal justice system, because that's a place where people who are violent should be. That's a place for people who are psychopaths to be, people that harm you, people that are physically going to harm you. And we need to really treat those that are not causing violent crimes for their addictions and their afflictions.
Right. And this is one of the things that honestly amazes me about a lot of American politics, is that so many of the issues that we have to deal with, they're big systemic issues. There's a lot of moving parts to them, and then they're very hard to break down in a way that is one of the reasons I enjoy these deeper conversations here. So I want to bring a couple of points together that you just hit a minute ago in order to make a point about that. And then I want to basically, hit it ice on another issue there, and then we'll see if you've got any closing thoughts there. Because I can talk until the cows come home, but we got to close up somewhere. But
I'm gonna be grilling some steaks for the family soon.
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah,
there comes a point where there's dinner to be made.
Right, we all got to eat. The bigger systemic issues, though. So you're hitting one on terms of the war on drugs, right? Through the criminalization of it, it has not done anything to lower drug use. What it's done is it's given us the highest crime rates in the developed world, and the largest number of actual prisoners, the highest incarceration rate in history. And I honestly, for a country that prides itself on being a free country, to lock up, to have 24% of the world's prison population, there's a problem there. We're approaching all of these things wrong. It doesn't, the criminalization did not fix the problem. It created other problems. But it's hard to take a step back and actually evaluate those. You mentioned poverty in Mexico, right? The extreme wealth disparities. And yes, as a developing country, there are very, very rich people and very, very poor people. One of the things that sort of infuriates me as an American looking at the changes in our economy in the last few decades is that today we have more people in extreme poverty than Mexico does, because we are leaving more and more Americans behind. But it's hard for people to kind of see what all is driving this. Homelessness is another one. Yeah, addiction can put many people in a terrible situation. But a significant chunk of the homeless population actually come out of the LGBT community, and Issa has a terrible record on LGBT issues. So how do you tackle homelessness while you're still voting, as Issa has, to allow discrimination in employment and housing, to allow people to, you're still encouraging people to throw their own children out onto the streets. If you continue to say discrimination based on someone's actual nature, their actual biology is a fine thing, and he has said, yes, that's fine, then you're giving parents a green light to throw their kids out And again, feeding the home. So you can't, someone like Issa cannot have a conversation about homelessness because their policies on issues like drugs, on issues like LGBT issues, are directly feeding California's large homeless population. So in terms of Issa himself, and thinking about your opponent in the district here, are there particular issues that stand out the most to you in his voting record? Because I could talk for hours just on his voting record and how horrific it's been for the American people. But you have to pick and choose which issues matter the most, in both in your campaign and to the people that you're talking to in the district. So what is it in his record that you most want to draw people's attention to?
That's a great question. Well, the first thing, follow back on the January 6th coup attempt. He failed to stand up for his oath to uphold the Constitution. He failed. And that is absolutely unforgivable. And that goes from freedom of speech all the way down. So he has failed us miserably. And also the decertification of the election. Again, what one of the hallmarks of the United States of America is that peaceful transition of power from right to left, from left to right. And so his attempt to override the will of the people is, again, unforgivable. It's unbelievable. That's where we get to where we're no longer a democracy, whether it's a representative democracy or whatnot. And so this is wrong. This is wrong. As far as taking money, and with the first phase of the Coronavirus Relief Act, number one, taking $400,000 that could have went to small businesses, that each one of those that would have helped out a lot.
Oh yeah.
But yet he took it for his multi-million-dollar real estate business. Is unforgivable yet again. This is unforgivable. And these are issues, and I'm narrowing and talking about issues for California 48. These are things, and this goes down straight to the corruption of whether it was California 50, California 48, whether it's Darrell Issa, Duncan Hunter, or Randy Duke Cunningham. We have not had true representation for decades.
Yeah. And
it is not okay. Now let's talk about the Constituency of Veterans. I am the child of veterans. Darrell Issa voted against providing medical treatment to veterans injured through open burn pits and other terrible afflictions, chronic ailments. He voted against it. This is unforgivable. He also voted against providing contraceptive services to veterans. Again, so that hits on women's rights and veterans' rights. He absolutely is not representing the constituency for which he tries to fly that flag and wave those banners, but he doesn't represent them. And so once they learn why would a veteran vote for him? Why would a woman vote for him? And that is just unforgivable. What's going on with Roe v. Wade? He absolutely is a supporter of stacking the Supreme Court and taking away a woman's right to choose. And again, that's a woman's right to choose to have the child or to not, and to have a medical procedure or to not have that medical procedure. But here's the crux of it. Here's what really is despicable. The most despicable concept is he doesn't want you to not have that. He wants you to have that child, but he voted against the child tax credit that pulled millions of children out of poverty.
Yes.
Millions of children out of poverty. So, and again, we want to make sure that children are not growing up in poverty.
Thank you.
So when you have the child, you should receive the support. And this was one of those avenues that would have done that. It's for the children. It's for women. And again, when individuals that will remain unnamed say that, well, it's because people were using it for drugs.
Oh God. Yeah.
Who was he talking to?
Mm-hmm.
Who were they talking to? Do they know these individuals? Or are they surely speculating? Because it seems like they're talking out of the backside of them.
Yes.
So they're not talking out of any type of knowledge.
Nope.
What about the infrastructure deal, the bipartisan infrastructure deal? He's against it. But he said he was going to fix our freeways when he ran in the most recent election. And yet he votes against the money to pay for it. And then what's he going to do on the tail end now that it's been passed? He's going to claim victory. Here comes your money so voting against something and then claiming victory, that is the ultimate stab in the back to your constituency. It is despicable. It's despicable. He's not helping our homeless population. He is not standing up for women's rights. And he is not helping to build our infrastructure. Mm-hmm. He is not helping in any way except for to enrich himself, which he has done a very good job of.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and it happens way too often that the people that are in there the longest make the contacts they need to enrich themselves and, pay attention to what's happening in the markets before they happen so they can get richer. And, yeah.
He is the monopoly maker.
Mm-hmm.
He is the anti-capitalist.
Yes.
He built monopolies. He is well known for that across the state. He built a monopoly for car alarms. And again, during this time of a pandemic, during this time of war, I offer myself as a nurse, as a person who has been fighting in the front lines against the coronavirus pandemic, as a person with a degree in business, as somebody who's got a track record of unwinding $1 billion worth of unnecessary fossil fuel infrastructure, having brought term limits to the city of Santee, protecting the general plan in my hometown through ballot initiatives, walking the walk, going door to door, collecting those signatures, building the grassroots campaign and having the dialogue versus the man who hides on his roof when his constituents come to speak to him when they are upset. Again, it's about modeling leadership, not slogans, and not about buzzwords. And again, on the border, he's talking about a wall, but again, he does not follow the fiscal conservative aspects of allowing dreamers to become citizens, about citizenship for critical workers, and about modernization of the Farmworkers Act. Absolutely. And I'll even go one step further. As a travel nurse, I lived in Alaska. And when I lived up in Alaska, I actually lived up in the Arctic for a time. And when I lived in the Arctic, I carried a firearm with when I went wherever I went, because they had these things called polar bears out there.
Right.
And it would kill you. And grizzly bears, a moose will kill you. There are so many deadly things. And so carrying a rifle and having a firearm was important there. But having a fully automatic weapon in an urban center like San Diego is completely unnecessary. And so as a gun owner, as a person who understands the use of firearms, I understand that there's certain rights, and I believe in the Second Amendment, but the Second Amendment ends at your front door. You have the right to protect yourself, but not the right to shoot a child who happens to be doing coming over to see your child or something of that nature. You have to use judgment, and it's people who have lack of judgment. That's what reasonable regulations are about. And so East County has a lot of gun owners, and we don't want our rights taken away. Right. But it's people like Daryl Issa, who doesn't serve the Second Amendment or the Constitution itself. He merely serves the gun lobby and the gun manufacturers, along with the arms industry, for which he takes almost all of his funding.
Yeah, and he's sort of the talking points, that same tribalistic talking points, which often have the opposite effect there. So a point that I would make to the independent and conservative voters in the 48th is to think carefully about what it is we're actually talking about with our beliefs. When we're talking about what we believe and what we support. So thinking about abortion rights, I think, is a really good example of this. So you're talking about, and people can all disagree. We can disagree on whether or not it should be done, the morality of this or that. But disagreements don't remove the facts. It again gets back to the whole, like, there is this thing called data, and we can look at it and we can see what happens. When we legalized abortion, the rates fell in this country. And abortion rights, the biggest thing that they've helped to prevent too is a great deal of infanticide. People have engaged in infanticide and or abortion for all of human existence for economic reasons. If you cannot afford to feed the existing children you have, people will make those terrible choices and be forced into them so that your other kids don't starve to death. So the single best way you can prevent those issues, the way you can help people to keep the kids that they want and to lower the abortion rates, is to end childhood poverty. So
Yes.
voting against that childhood tax credit is basically asking more people to get abortions, which seems to be the exact opposite of what people with, like Issa's 0% from like NARAL are trying to campaign on. But when you're trying to criminalize abortion and then increase childhood poverty, all you're doing is forcing people into back alleys. You're going to increase, and I'm sure you know this very well from your profession, but I mean, maternal mortality went way down too, because these back alley abortions, these like illegal abortions, used to kill a lot of women. If you criminalize it again, it will not lower the rates. It will only kill more actual Americans. So if the moral issue is the unborn child, if that's what you care about, then childhood poverty and safe access to the procedures are what would do that most effectively.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. And the contraceptive services.
Exactly. Offering
Why
contraception
would you vote
through
against the contraception. Yeah. So it makes no sense.
Yeah.
And again, we're just, like you said, we're just walking through his voting record.
Right. Exactly.
All it is no. He votes no on everything, and he doesn't want you to have voting rights. He does not. He is just. It's unbelievable. Yep. So it's sickening. It's sickening. And again, he doesn't even live here.
Right. Which seems like it should be a good point for a lot of voters.
He doesn't even live here. I don't even know if he ever comes to this district. He doesn't. Why? When would he?
Why would he spend time? Yeah, he's not going to spend time in East County out with us. I mean, I enjoyed those nature trails too. I mean, I live on a mountain. We both love that kind of hiking. Is Daryl Issa going to be wandering around, in a lot of these? No. I mean, he's going to stay in his nice, rich neighborhood, which means it takes us all back to like, okay, if you care about the swamp and corruption, how do we get rid of people like Daryl Issa, because they are the problem? So, to wind this down here, then the last thing I want to ask you then, well, two quick things. First is, as far as the whole Indie Dems idea, would you pledge to hold accountable people of any and all parties for corruption, for their voting records, talking about these kind of issues that come up here, rather than just, simply following along the party line?
Absolutely. That's what I've always done.
Good.
That is what I've always done. I am running on a platform of anti-corruption in a district that has seen nothing but corruption during my entire life. And it's disgusting.
Thank you. Exactly. That's all we want. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not a matter of pursuing only the other guy or this or that. I mean, at the end of the day, it shouldn't matter who it is. If they are taking money from the wrong people and betraying the voters, betraying their oath of office, betraying the Constitution, we should be able to call them out on that. And that's something
correct.
that we really want to see, is that those kind of independent voices who are going to speak for their constituents first. So then, speaking to your constituents then, or to anybody else around the country who's watching this, if you're interested, if you're impressed, if you want to push Issa out, if you want to support Stephen Houlahan's run here, you let people know where they can sign up to volunteer, where they can donate, your social media, anything like that.
Absolutely. It's easy to find. It's electhoulahan.com. I'm a nurse. If you ever saw MASH, it was always Nurse Houlahan.
Hot Lips Houlahan, yeah.
If you can't remember that, then
Yep.
you can't remember.
Yep.
And it's HOULAHAN, electhoulahan.com. That's my handle on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
You can go on to my website. You can donate. You can volunteer. And you can learn a little bit about me. And most importantly, for those in California's 48th, you can vote for me. It's not about what party you are. It's about doing the right thing. Democrat, Republican, no party preference, and everyone else. It's about having true leadership and somebody who loves California 48, someone who has a track record of having done the right thing, someone who has served in both as a nurse during the time of COVID and on the city council and made things happen in against all odds. Someone who has pulled himself up from his own bootstraps. Someone who knows. Someone like you. That's me, Stephen Houlahan.
All right. Well, thanks very much for your time, Stephen. I've enjoyed this. These are always a lot of fun. I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this thing. And I encourage you to follow Stephen's social media, check out his website, see what you think there. And again, this is true for anybody around here who wants to support real change in Washington and push back against that corruption, as well as obviously everyone in the 48th, because you deserve somebody who actually represents your interests and will come and talk to you, not just hang out with the lobbyists. So,
absolutely. And so we're running that grassroots campaign, and keep your eye out because you're going to see me. I'll be out on the street corners. I'll be out rallying, and I'll be knocking on your door, and I'm going to earn your vote. So have a great evening.
Thanks very much, Stephen, and thanks to everyone else for watching. Have a great night.
Thank you, Liam.